Welcome to another edition of the Final Wrap Sports Talk Show live on ShapiroShow.com. I'm your host, NFLExporter, and if you're tuning in for the first time, you want to make sure to join us each and every Tuesday at 7 p.m. right here on ShapiroShow.com. If you happen to miss the live broadcast on Tuesday, the show re-airs every Saturday at 2 p.m. Now, it's the preseason, and we're making sure that all our NFL as well as fantasy football fans are ready for another great season by covering all of our bases. So the first week of the show, we broke down the entire AFC conference, division by division, team by team. Last week, we broke down the entire NFC conference in that same manner. This week, we have a great show lined up, starting off our fantasy football section, where we'll be covering our quarterbacks, running backs, and wide receivers. And then next week, right before the regular season hits, we'll be ending out the preseason by covering our tight ends, defense, special teams, and kickers. Now, if you happen to miss the shows the first 2 weeks, you can simply go under the archive section here on ShapiroShow.com, look for NFLExporter, and we're currently in the month of August. So we're going to take a quick commercial break, and when we return, we'll start with our quarterback rankings. Once again, it's the Final Wrap Sports Talk Show on ShapiroShow.com. Stay tuned. Welcome back, everyone. Once again, it's the Final Wrap Sports Talk Show on ShapiroShow.com with your host, the NFLExporter. We're going to get our fantasy football section started by ranking our quarterbacks, and without question, the Denver Broncos' Peyton Manning is the consensus number one choice. Last year, Manning shattered the NFL record book for passing yards and passing touchdowns in the regular season. This year, Manning has all of his weapons back, with the exception of Eric Decker, wide receiver, who left to the New York Jets. Replacing him will be Emmanuel Sanders, who came over from the Pittsburgh Steelers. He also lost running back Knowshon Moreno to the Miami Dolphins, but second-year running back Monty Ball got a lot of time last year and should be ready to step into that role. If you want a great quarterback on your fantasy football team, Peyton Manning is certainly the guy. Next in line, we have Drew Brees of the New Orleans Saints. Without question, Brees is an elite passer. Brees is the only player in NFL history to have back-to-back years passing for over 5,000 yards, and it was his record that Peyton Manning broke last year. So if you're looking for a top-tier quarterback and Peyton Manning is not on the board, Drew Brees is certainly the next guy in line. After Drew Brees, we have Tom Brady of the New England Patriots. Last year, Brady passed for over 4,300 yards and 25 TDs, and that was with a bunch of rookies, and he had a lot of injuries at the skill position players. This year, Brady's weapons are fully healthy, and I expect for Tom Brady to rebound in a major way and be a top 5 quarterback in fantasy football again. So to all my Tom Brady fans, certainly don't let last year's shaky performance deter you. With his weapons fully healthy, Tom Brady is in line for a great year. Next in line, we have Aaron Rodgers of the Green Bay Packers. We all know that Rodgers is one of the best in the business, especially throwing the football, scrambling, or on the run. Now this year, Aaron Rodgers doesn't have the same cast that we've seen over the past years. Donald Driver, Greg Jennings, and Jermichael Finley are all gone, but he still has Jordy Nelson and Randall Cobb, and the Packers have a power running game now with running back Eddie Lacy. I think Aaron Rodgers will be more effective in play action and will be more efficient with the football overall. You also know that Rodgers is a threat to score on his feet as well, so Aaron Rodgers is still one of the top quarterbacks in the NFL. Fifth, I have Matt Stafford of the Detroit Lions. Now, I know to some that may come as a shock. but this is fantasy football, which means we're looking for stats. And Stafford has everything on his side. He has the best wide receiver in the NFL, Calvin Johnson. The Lions have a plethora of weapons, and Stafford has averaged nearly 5,000 yards passing over the past 3 seasons. If Stafford can find a way to cut down on his interceptions, fumbles, and silly mistakes, he certainly has an opportunity to move up into the top 3 quarterbacks in fantasy football this year. Stafford is also a quarterback where you can land in later rounds and get excellent value out of. Next, we have Colin Kaepernick of the San Francisco 49ers. Kaepernick has a ton of weapons on offense. He's also very effective running the football and is a guy who doesn't turn the football over a lot. And so Colin Kaepernick is another quarterback who you'll be able to grab in later rounds and provide excellent value for your football team. Next, I have Robert Griffith III of the Washington Redskins. We all know RG3 had a fantastic rookie season before being injured. Last year was not 100% and did not have all of his weapons. This year, RG3 is back 100% healthy. They have a new offensive coordinator in Mike Zimmerman, and they have new weapon in Deshaun Jackson, who came over from the Philadelphia Eagles. He'll be paired up with Pierre Garçon. Both of those wide receivers had over 1,300 yards receiving last year. He also has an excellent running back in Alfred Morris behind him and a nice young tight end in Jordan Reed. They also brought over Andre Roberts, wide receiver from the Arizona Cardinals. So I certainly like RG3's supporting cast. And if he can learn how to slide and get out of bounds to avoid big hits, RG3 is definitely in line to rebound and have an excellent year in fantasy football. Next in line, I have Jay Cutler of the Chicago Bears. Cutler comes in with one of the most prolific offenses in the NFL. His 2 wide receivers had the most receiving yards combined last year. I'm talking about Brandon Marshall and Alshon Jeffrey. He also has Matt Forte, a very versatile running back, and Martellus Bennett at tight end. If Jay Cutler can stay healthy and cut down on his turnovers, he's another quarterback who's in line to have an outstanding year. Next, I have Tony Romo of the Dallas Cowboys. Now, I will say that Romo, you have to be concerned. He had back surgery in the offseason. The Dallas Cowboys have not been the best team in pass protection over the years. However, the Dallas Cowboys defense is not good at all this year. So Dallas is going to be on the offense is going to be on the field a lot. And he has some great skill position players. He has Pro Bowler Dez Bryant, future Hall of Fame tight end Jason Witten, second-year player Terrence Williams, who certainly had an excellent rookie year, and running back DeMarco Murray. Tony Romo is not the quarterback to lead your team to a Super Bowl, but he's certainly a capable starting quarterback when it comes up to putting big numbers in fantasy football. Next, I have Nick Foles of the Philadelphia Eagles. Last year, Foles had the 3rd best season for a quarterback in NFL history, throwing 27 touchdowns and only 2 interceptions. I certainly don't expect for Foles, or any quarterback for that matter, to only throw 2 interceptions this year, but he certainly should be able to improve on his 27 touchdown passes. He has a plethora of weapons, and Philadelphia's offense is one of the most explosive in the NFL. Nick Foles, without question, is another quarterback that you'll be able to land in later rounds and get excellent value from. Next, I have Andrew Luck of the Indianapolis Colts. Luck has put together back-to-back seasons passing for over 4,000 yards, and he did that last year with 2 of his starters injured in tight end Dwayne Allen, and Reggie Wayne missed the second half of the season. This year, Wayne and Allen are both back healthy. You still have speedster T.Y. Hilton, and then you have tight end Coby Fleener. The Colts also went out and acquired Hakeem Nicks, who's a former Pro Bowler and a Super Bowl winner for the New York Giants. Andrew Luck has continued to improve his play year by year, and with the players that he has surrounding him, I think this will be his best year thus far as an NFL pro. Andrew Luck is definitely a great player for your fantasy football team. Next, I have Matt Ryan of the Atlanta Falcons. Ryan has 2 of the best wide receivers in the NFL at his disposal in Julio Jones and Roddy White. Now, my concern here is that future Hall of Fame tight end Tony Gonzalez is no longer with Atlanta. He was averaging around 80 catches a year, was a big-time threat in the red zone, and really demanded a lot of attention in the middle of the field. And so I think Ryan certainly can put up the numbers, but they're going to have to find someone to step in and replace what Tony Gonzalez was bringing to the table. Hopefully, slot receiver Harry Douglas can fill in and help in that position. Now, I will say you want to caution with Matt Ryan. The Falcons are not, they don't have a lot of depth at the wide receiver position. And like last year, when Julio Jones missed the last 11 games of the season, if Jones or Roddy White were to get injured, it could be another long season for Matt Ryan. But we're going to take into consideration that his players will be healthy. Matty Ice should get back on track and be a nice pickup for your fantasy football team at quarterback. Next, we have Phillip Rivers of the San Diego Chargers. Rivers was able to get back on track last year, passing for over 4,400 yards and 32 touchdown passes. He has Keenan Allen, nice number one wide receiver who's going to be in his second year out of Cal. He still has Antonio Gates, also has speedy tight end Ladarius Green. Malcolm Floyd, who missed the majority of last season, is back. He also has running back Danny Woodhead. If Phillip Rivers can get the protection he received last year, and I certainly think that he will, I think Phillip Rivers will be able to duplicate his numbers from last year. He's another quarterback who you can catch in later rounds and get excellent value from. Next, I have Russell Wilson of the Seattle Seahawks. Wilson, we all know, won the Super Bowl last year, continues to improve through 26 TD passes to only 9 interceptions last year. Also can get it done on the ground, had over 500 yards rushing, but only 1 touchdown. I certainly think he can improve in that area, which should bump his stats up. Look for Russell Wilson to have a spectacular season. He's another guy you'll be able to catch in later rounds and will give you excellent bang for your buck. Next, I have Andy Dalton of the Cincinnati Bengals. Now, Dalton lost his starting wide receiver and Marvin Jones for the first 4 or 5 weeks of the season, and so his expectations have been tapered down a little, but he has the second best wide receiver in the NFL in AJ Green, and still has a quality backup in Mohamed Sanu, who will be replacing Marvin Jones until he returns. And then he has playmaker Giovanni Bernard, who can catch the ball out of the backfield, and 2 good tight ends in Jermaine Gresham and Tyler Eifert. Now, they do have a new offensive coordinator in Hugh Jackson, who likes to run the football a lot, so we'll have to see if the Bengals' offensive philosophy changes any. But Andy Dalton is a proven quarterback who's been able to put up the big numbers in the regular season. Andy Dalton's yet another quarterback you can catch at later rounds and be a nice pickup for your fantasy football team. Next, I have Cam Newton of the Carolina Panthers. Now, if Newton had better weapons around him, he'd certainly be a top 10 quarterback, but the receivers that he has this year are all new. He has rookie Calvin Benjamin from Florida State, Jason Avant, and Jericho Cotchery are veterans, along with Tyquan Underwood. And up to this point in his career, Cam Newton has not shown the consistency as a pocket passer. So I'm a little concerned there. I really don't understand why the Panthers haven't surrounded him with some more weapons, but Cam Newton is certainly a guy who can get it done running the football and is definitely a big-time threat to score once the Panthers get inside the red zone. The one positive coming back from last season that I do like is tight end Greg Olsen. Olsen is certainly a top-tier tight end, and I'm quite sure Cam Newton will be looking to hook up with him in the passing game quite a bit. Newton also had off-season surgery on his ankle, and so his expectations are tapered a little bit. I think this Carolina Panthers offense may struggle a bit this year, but Cam Newton is certainly worth looking at possibly being a starting quarterback for your football team. Next, I have Josh McCown of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. McCown had a great deal of success last year in Chicago. This year, he's in a similar situation. Has 2 tall receivers in 6'5" Vincent Jackson and 6'5" rookie Mike Evans from Texas A&M. Also has 3 quality tight ends and 3 quality running backs. Now, it may take McCown a little bit time to learn the system and for him and his offense to get on the same page and develop chemistry. But I think that if McCown can stay within himself, he certainly has some offensive weapons that he may be considered a starter for your football team. Last but not least, we have Carson Palmer of the Arizona Cardinals. Now, Palmer is another guy who has good weapons on the outside with Larry Fitzgerald and Michael Floyd. His tight end play could be a little bit more steadier, but they did go out and and pick up Teddy Ginn Jr. from the Carolina Panthers, a guy to give him some speed coming out that slot and stretch the field, which is a threat that the Cardinals have not had in past years. If Carson Palmer can get the protection he needs and cut down on his turnovers, he's certainly a guy who may be a sleeper pick starting for your football team. Now that'll wrap up our first and second tier of quarterbacks. The quarterbacks that we just went over and ranked are all quarterbacks who are worthy of being a starting quarterback on your football team. When we come back from a quick commercial break, we'll get into the latter tier of quarterbacks who are your backup quarterbacks and fill-in players in fantasy football. It's the Final Wrap Sports Talk Show live on DerekShapiroShow.com. We'll be right back. Thank you for returning to the Final Wrap Sports Talk Show. I'm your host, NFLExporter, and now we're going to get into our backup quarterbacks rankings for fantasy football. We're going to start off with Ben Roethlisberger of the Pittsburgh Steelers. Roethlisberger is certainly a proven commodity, throwing for 26 and 28 touchdown passes in each of the last two seasons. Now the Steelers are going to look to run the football a little bit more this upcoming year. But Roethlisberger has 2 Super Bowl victories. The Steelers have been to another Super Bowl, and I think that, given his track record, Ben Roethlisberger is certainly a player that you have to consider being a quality backup quarterback on your fantasy football team. Next, I have Joe Flacco of the Baltimore Ravens, another guy who's been to the playoffs a lot of times, has a Super Bowl ring under his belt, tons of experience. And this year, I think he's a little more equipped on offense from the weapons he had last year. He has Torrey Smith. They also went out and grabbed Steve Smith from the Carolina Panthers. His tight end Dennis Pitta is back healthy. He missed the majority of last season. They also brought in Owen Daniels. You have Jacoby Jones at wide receiver, as well as second-year player Marlon Brown. And so I certainly think that Joe Flacco it will be a quality backup for your football team this year when you can find the right matchup. Next, I have Ryan Tannehill of the Miami Dolphins. Last year, Tannehill threw for over 3,900 yards with 24 touchdowns. At his disposal, he has speedy wide receiver Mike Wallace, a great number 2 wide receiver in Brian Hartline. He has a couple young guys in Rashard Matthews, Rashard Matthews, as well as Jarvis Landry, in the 3 and 4 wide receivers. He also has an elite tight end in Charles Clay. And so if Ryan Tannehill, and I think this year he's going to be asked to pass the football quite a bit until they can get that running game established. If he can stay away from turnovers, Tannehill, without question, will be a quarterback who can step in certain weeks and give you quality play. Next in line, I have Sam Bradford of the St. Louis Rams. Now, Bradford is a quarterback who struggled to stay healthy, but without question, when he's in the lineup, his accuracy is his strong suit. Now, the Rams don't have a ton of big-name wide receivers, really wide receivers we haven't heard of before. He does have Tavon Austin, the playmaker they drafted from West Virginia last year. I'm quite sure Bradford will be looking to lean on him, as well as tight end Jamil Cook. But this Rams running game is going to have to be effective. Bradford is a quarterback who thrives in play action. And again, Sam Bradford has to stay healthy. But I think if he gets time to throw the football, he can certainly improve on his numbers. Last year, through 7 games before he got injured and missed the rest of last season, he had 14 touchdown passes and only 4 interceptions. Next in line, we have Alex Smith of the Kansas City Chiefs. Now, we know that Smith is not a guy who's going to give you big numbers in regards to 300 and 400 yard games, but he's certainly very steady. Last year threw for over 3,000 yards, 23 touchdowns, only 7 interceptions. He's in a West Coast system for Andy Reid, so there's a lot of dinking, dumping the football off, not a lot of big plays down the field. Wide receiver Dwayne Bowe certainly has got to step his game up. Bowe led the NFL in 2011 with 15 TD receptions, but his play has fell off dramatically the last couple years. If he can get back into the shape and playing at a Pro Bowl level, how he did, that'll be excellent to team up with running back Jamal Charles, who was an All-Pro performer last year. I don't really like the Chiefs' weapons at wide receiver, but it's pretty much the same cast from last year. And Alex Smith, especially down the stretch, was a steady play. So Alex Smith is certainly a quality backup for your football team. Next in line, I have Eli Manning. Now, Manning is a big-time question. Last year, he led the NFL with 25 interceptions. It was the third time in his career that he's threw for over 20 interceptions. He always seems to turn the ball over when it comes to passing the football, but has been able to put mascara on that in some years by passing for a lot of yards and passing for a good amount of touchdowns. Now, this is not the same Giants offense that we've become accustomed to seeing over the past couple years. There's no more Ahmad Bradshaw, no more Andre Brown. Hakeem Nicks has left as well. Victor Cruz is still the main guy there, but now with Cruz being the main focus, I'm unsure how much production we'll see from him. You know that he was thriving in the slot when you had Mario Manningham and Hakeem Nicks on the outside a couple years ago. Eli Manning has basically a new cast of offensive players around him. Ruben Randall is in his third year from LSU. He'll be starting opposite Victor Cruz. You have Jernigan, who's in his second year, and rookie Odell Beckham. And then at running back, you have Rashad Jennings and rookie Andre Brown. And so I think that the Giants are going to end up on the field a lot as far as offense goes, which at the end of the day will allow Eli Manning the opportunity to stack up some good numbers in fantasy when you can find the right matchup for him as a quality backup quarterback. Next, I have Matt Schaub of the Oakland Raiders. Now, Schaub thus far in preseason has not looked too good. You may see his ranking drop a little lower. I'm certainly trying to give him the benefit of the doubt. He'll have two solid running backs in Darren McFadden and Maurice Jones-Drew behind him. We know that Schaub thrives in play action, which is certainly the system they'll be running here. He has some pretty quality wide receivers in Rod Streeter. They brought over James Jones from the Green Bay Packers. And so you have a couple quality wide receivers there, along with Denarius Moore, who's a speed guy. And then they also have tight end Michael Riviera. And so I think that Matt Schaub, as long as he can protect the football and cut down on the silly mistakes, he's certainly a guy who's been known to put up big numbers, even though it hasn't resulted in his team winning football games. Next in line, I have quarterback E.J. Manuel of the Buffalo Bills. Now, Manuel's just in his second year. I certainly expect for him to still have some growing pains, but I like the weapons that they've surrounded him with. In the backfield, you have the explosive C.J. Spiller. You have the dual threat of Fred Jackson, and they also brought over Bryce Brown from the Philadelphia Eagles. In the passing game, the Bills drafted Sammy Watkins, the number 1 wide receiver coming out of college last year from the University of Clemson. He's certainly a guy, when he gets his hands on the football, can score from anywhere on the football field. They have Mike Williams, the veteran receiver. He's actually a product close by from Niagara Falls, New York. Had a couple good seasons in Tampa Bay. And then Robert Woods is a good second-year player. Had a good season as a rookie last year from the University of Southern California. The Bills also have tight end Scott Chandler, who's underrated. He has a good set of hands. And Manuel certainly is a guy who can scramble when pass protection breaks down. I think if E.J. Manuel can keep the turnovers down and just kind of play good, solid football, he certainly has the weapons around him to be a quality backup on your football team. Next, I have Ryan Fitzpatrick of the Houston Texans. Fitzpatrick has all-pro wide receiver Andre Johnson and second-year guy DeAndre Hopkins at his disposal. Now, we'll caution here with Fitzpatrick. This is a new team for him. We're not quite sure how running back Arian Foster, if he's going to be back playing at an elite level. But I certainly think that Fitzpatrick, another guy, I know this is a common theme, but in fantasy football, you know, interceptions and fumbles really hurt your quarterback stats. I think if Fitzpatrick can eliminate those, he certainly has a couple weapons on the outside that will allow him to have some success as a backup for your football team in some fantasy games. Next in line, I have Geno Smith of the New York Jets. Smith was very inconsistent last year, but he's made tremendous strides in the offseason. And the Jets went out and picked up Eric Decker from the Denver Broncos to try to help boost their passing game some. You also still have Stephen Hill, who's had trouble holding on to the football as far as catching. And then Jeremy Curley's a solid guy at the slot. The Jets also have a solid running game now, bringing over Chris Johnson from the Tennessee Titans. You still have Chris Ivory and Bilal Powell. And so I think that Geno Smith is a quarterback that if he can stay composed and get time to throw the football, there's no reason why he shouldn't be able to step in and give you some production in a couple games this year when you find the right matchups. Next, I have Brian Hoyer of the Cleveland Browns. Now, Hoyer is in a competition battle with rookie Johnny Manziel. And so whether it's Manziel or Hoyer, I still think that they're going to be a backup quarterback. We're still waiting to hear word from the NFL on a possible suspension of wide receiver Josh Gordon, especially if Gordon is out the lineup. Expectations are going to be peeled back a little bit. There's going to be all new wide receivers in Nate Burleson and Miles Austin and Lavelle Hawkins, who are all veterans and never the number one option on their teams that they came from. Tight end, though, Cameron Jordan is certainly a guy that you want to look out for. Jordan Cameron is certainly a tight end that you want to look out for. He was one of the best tight ends in the NFL last year, and I'm quite sure he'll be the top target for whether it's Hoyer or Manziel. Again, either way it goes, who's starting in Cleveland, they're going to be a backup quarterback on your fantasy football team. Similar situation going on out in Minnesota. You have veteran Matt Castle. He's battling the rookie Teddy Bridgewater from the University of Louisville. Whoever ends up being the starting quarterback there, they certainly have some good weapons surrounding them. You have Cordell Patterson, the explosive second-year wide receiver from the University of Tennessee. You have veteran Greg Jennings. You have Kyle Rudolph at tight end. They also have a quality third receiver in Jerome Simpson. And then, of course, you have the best pure running back in the NFL, Adrian Peterson, running the football. I think whoever the starting quarterback is there is certainly set up for success and will give you some excellent play in a couple games this season as a backup quarterback. Next, I have Chad Henne of the Jacksonville Jaguars. Henne actually would be rated a little higher if he had his weapons, but he's without Justin Blackmon. Ace Sanders is going to miss some time at wide receiver as well. Not too impressed with the running game. They brought over Toby Gerhart from the Minnesota Vikings, but he still does have Cecil Shorts III, who's been a good receiver his first 2 years in the NFL. And then they also went out and drafted Marquise Lee, who had a very good season in 2012 for USC. Actually was amongst the top wide receivers in college football. But last year's play tapered off a little bit, but he's looked good in the preseason thus far. The Jaguars are another team who are going to be, their offense is going to be on the football field a lot, which will open up opportunities for Henne to pad his stats later on in football games. Last but not least, I have Jake Locker of the Tennessee Titans. Locker has been extremely inconsistent in his career thus far, throwing the football. I'm not too high on the weapons he has. Now, I do like Justin Hunter's second-year player. I also do like Kendall Wright, a third-year player out of Baylor. You still have veteran Nate Washington and a very solid tight end in Delaney Walker. But Jake Locker just has not been able to stay healthy. And when he's on the football field, has not shown the accuracy that you need to play on a consistent level in the NFL. So I have him coming in last. I don't expect too much from Locker, but there certainly will be a couple games this year where he will have some success that will be fantasy football relevant. That wraps up our quarterback rankings. When we return, we'll move it over to our running backs. Once again, it's the NFL Exporter live on DerekShapiroShow.com, and you're tuned in to the final wrap. We'll be back in one moment. Hello everyone, and thank you for returning to the Final Wrap Sports Talk Show live on NFLExporter.com. And now we're going to move over into our running back rankings for the 2014 fantasy football season for the NFL. Starting off our list is Adrian Peterson of the Minnesota Vikings. Peterson has averaged over 1,300 yards and over 12 TDs in his 7 years as a pro. This year he'll have some extra motivation coming into the season. The Philadelphia Eagles running back LaShawn McCoy said he feels he's the best running back in the NFL, and Adrian Peterson will be out to prove him wrong. Peterson is always a threat to run for over 2,000 yards. In my opinion, Adrian Peterson is still your top choice at running back in fantasy football. Next, we have Jamal Charles of the Kansas City Chiefs. Charles led all fantasy football players with 19 touchdowns last year. He is the heart and soul of the Kansas City Chiefs offense. We'll continue to see a hefty amount of touches, can get it done running the football as well as catching out of the backfield. Jamal Charles, one of the toughest players in the NFL, has big time speed and can take it the distance from anywhere on the football field. If Adrian Peterson is off the board, Jamal Charles is certainly the next best running back available. Next, I have Matt Forte of the Chicago Bears. Forte was second in total all-purpose yards last year behind the Eagles' LaShawn McCoy. Forte is with one of the most prolific offenses in the NFL, and I certainly expect for Forte to continue to excel. He had over 1,300 yards rushing last year, over 600 through the air. Matt Forte is an excellent pickup for your fantasy football team. Next, we have LaShawn McCoy of the Philadelphia Eagles, and if it wasn't for running back Darren Sproles coming over from New Orleans, I would probably have McCoy slated at number 3. Now, don't get me wrong, McCoy is still one of the best in the business, and I certainly expect him to have another spectacular year. Last year, McCoy led the NFL with 1,609 rushing yards. He can get it done catching the ball to the backfield as well. He's certainly one of the top playmakers, and LaShawn McCoy is definitely a great fantasy pickup for your team this year. Next, I have Eddie Lacy of the Green Bay Packers. The second-year player is ready to improve on his 1,178 rushing yards and 11 TDs from last year. He's with Aaron Rodgers. You know that offense is going to move the football up and down the football field, and Lacy will certainly be able to take advantage of a lot of touchdowns once the Packers get inside the goal line. Now next, we want to put an asterisk next to this one. Now there usually wouldn't be any question marks around running back Marshawn Lynch of the Seattle Seahawks. However, Lynch is unhappy with his current contract situation, and so this thing could go one of either two ways. It could go the good way, in which he certainly will be number 6 on my draft board. He'll continue to average over 1,300 yards and 12 TDs like he's done the last 3 years, helping Seattle to a Super Bowl victory last year. Or if Lynch wants to preserve his body and really doesn't want to play that hard for Seattle, since it doesn't appear that they have him in their long-range plans, we may not see Lynch going at 100%, which could spell disaster. So I think this is certainly a situation that we have to keep a close eye on in the preseason. But if Marshawn Lynch is motivated and possibly wants to come out and play to show other NFL teams that he still has it and earn a big contract elsewhere, this certainly will be another productive year for Marshawn Lynch out in Seattle. Next, I have Monty Ball of the Denver Broncos. Now, Ball is on the most explosive offense in the NFL out in Denver with Peyton Manning. He'll certainly be able to get to produce in the running game, as well as he has a good set of hands out the backfield. We know how the Denver Broncos move the football up and down the field with ease, and Monty Ball will certainly benefit from that, having the opportunity to score a lot of touchdowns once the Broncos enter the red zone in the goal line area. I like Monty Ball. Next, I have DeMarco Murray of the Dallas Cowboys. Last year, Murray put up over 1,100 yards rushing with 9 touchdowns and made the Pro Bowl. He struggled with injuries in his first 3 years, but if he can stay healthy, he's on a very explosive Dallas Cowboys offense. This guy has proven he can get the job done. And again, if Murray can stay healthy, don't be surprised to see him be a top 5 running back by the time the end of the season comes around. I really like DeMarco Murray. He'll be an excellent pickup for your team after some of the juggernauts who are at the top of the list are gone. Next, I have Alfred Morris of the Washington Redskins. Morris is another guy who's been very productive in his first 2 seasons. Has over 2,800 rushing yards with 20 touchdowns, and a healthy Robert Griffith III back at quarterback, along with the weapons they have in the passing game. I expect for Alfred Morris to continue to be one of the top running backs in fantasy football this year. Next in line, you have Arian Foster. Foster is another player that we're going to put an asterisk by, like we did Marshawn Lynch, but for different reasons. Now, Foster, coming into last season, outside of his injuries, was certainly a top 3 fantasy player overall, but he had back surgery last season, caused him to miss a ton of playing time, and he's been limited to action so far this preseason due to hamstring and calf injuries, which some are attributing to that back surgery. Now, Houston also has a new offensive coordinator. Head coach Gary Kubiak, who is running that zone blocking scheme, which has been so effective for so many years in the NFL, is gone. And so with the new offensive coordinator, we have to make sure that Foster is going to still be effective running the football. If he's healthy, he'll get the touches. He should certainly be a top 10 running back. But those couple areas I just discussed are certainly things that you want to keep your eye out for. He's another guy you must keep a close eye on to see what happens in the preseason with him before you spend a number 1 pick on him and end up very disappointed. Next, I have C.J. Spiller of the Buffalo Bills. Spiller's another guy who struggled with injuries, but when he's healthy, he's one of the most explosive players in the NFL. They have a young quarterback out there in Buffalo, and I certainly expect for C.J. Spiller to get more than enough opportunities. He's shown that he can go the distance from far out. C.J. Spiller, I would love to see him on the football field for an entire season. I think he's a guy who can move up into a top 10 fantasy football running back if that's the case. Next in line, you have Reggie Bush of the Detroit Lions. Bush is another dual threat, can get it done running the football, had over 1,000 yards running last year, but also can get it done in the air. The Detroit Lions have one of the most explosive offenses in the NFL. Reggie Bush is certainly in line to have another good year all-purpose. We just need to see him scoring more touchdowns. He's another guy who can, if he can get in the end zone more, can certainly be nipping right outside or getting into that top 10 in fantasy football running backs. Next, I have Frank Gore of the San Francisco 49ers. Gore is running behind one of the best run blocking offensive lines in the NFL. The 49ers have the most weapons they've had in their passing games in some years. Frank Gore is steady as they come, and he's another guy who can land in later rounds and get excellent value out of. I simply love what Frank Gore brings to the table for your fantasy football team. Next, I have Le'Veon Bell of the Pittsburgh Steelers. Now, Bell will be rated a little higher. I just have to wait and see how the arrival of LeGarrette Blount from the New England Patriots factors in. Now, I do know that Pittsburgh plans on running the football a lot this year, and I certainly expect for Bell to be able to improve on his 850 rushing yards and 8 touchdowns from last year. Again, I'm just concerned that there's a possibility LeGarrette Blount may take away from some of his goal line carries, so that's certainly a situation we want to look at in the preseason. But without question, Le'Veon Bell is certainly a starting running back this year in fantasy football. Next in line, I have Zach Stacy of the St. Louis Rams. Now, the Rams have one of the better run blocking lines as well. On that left side, you have center Scott Wells. Stud rookie Greg Robinson out of University of Auburn. He'll be starting his career at guard until he gets a little bit more accustomed to the NFL game. And then you have perennial Pro Bowler Jake Long. And so last year, Stacy was able to run for over 900 yards and 9 TDs. I certainly think he's a guy, now that he is in the starting role from day one coming into the NFL season. He's certainly a guy who's underrated, but will give you some nice production running the football out in St. Louis. Of course, any running back that you draft in the NFC West, you just want to watch, because the NFC West have 4 top 10 defenses this year, which means that Stacy, as well as Frank Gore, even Marshawn Lynch, they're all in that NFC West division. All of those guys could have some tough tasks ahead of them facing those stingy defenses 6 times a year. Next, I have Giovanni Bernard of the Cincinnati Bengals. Bernard will have more opportunities to touch the football in his second year. Had a very good rookie season. Now that Hugh Jackson is there, a offensive coordinator who likes to run the football, I certainly think Bernard will step his game up. Bernard is a running back you'll be able to catch in later rounds and get excellent value from. Remember the name, Giovanni Bernard. He can also get it done pass catching out of the backfield. This guy has some excellent shake in his step. Next in line, I have Andre Ellington of the Arizona Cardinals. Now, this is the situation with Ellington. He's already been given a starting role. He's already his head coach, Bruce Arians, has already said this guy is going to be a workhorse for this offense. Now, the questions for Ellington, this is his second year, so can he handle the entire workload for an entire season? And then now that he is the starting running back, teams are going to be scheming for him. And so it's going to be interesting to see how this situation plays out. He's an explosive player, had an 80-yard touchdown run last year, also was very effective catching out of the backfield, has the ability to actually line up at wide receiver. But the Arizona Cardinals offensive line has not done well in run blocking. With that being said, Andre Ellington is certainly a guy who's going to get a lot of touches. He's another player in that NFC West, though. You have to consider some of those tough defenses he's going to face throughout the course of the season. Next in line, I have Chris Johnson of the New York Jets. Johnson comes over to a New York Jet team who's certainly going to look to run the football a whole lot this year. Johnson has 6 consecutive 1,000-yard seasons in Tennessee before coming over in the offseason. The Jets certainly have a couple good offensive linemen in Nick Mangold, DeBrica Shea Ferguson, and Willie Colon. And I expect for Chris Johnson to get more than enough touches. CJ2K says he's still one of the top running backs in the league, still feels he can rush for over 2,000 yards. He'll have his opportunity this year. Chris Johnson is a running back who, stock and expectations have fallen, but he'll certainly have his opportunities. Next in line, I have Ryan Matthews for the San Diego Chargers. Now, Matthews is going to have a little bit of a timeshare going on this year. Now, we know that Phillip Rivers likes to throw the football. When that's the case, he brings in Danny Woodhead. And then the Chargers went out and got Donald Brown, a tough runner between the tackles. So Matthews was able to rush for over 1,200 yards last year. It was the first NFL season he was able to stay healthy. But if he's going to end up splitting his time, that obviously is a situation that could hurt his production. So we'll have to keep an eye out on that in the preseason to see how that works, or our workload is going to be split up. Rounding out our top running backs this year, I have Stephen Ridley and Shane Vereen of the New England Patriots. Now, I did say 2 running backs because we have to see how this is going to go. Now, Ridley was the man back in 2012, running for over 1,200 yards, had 12 TDs, was one of the top 10 running backs in fantasy football. But last year had a hard time holding onto the football and ended up being benched by the time the end of the season came around. Vereen got off to a great start last season, running for over 100 yards versus Buffalo, and also has the ability to catch out of the backfield. He's another running back who can line up at wide receiver position, but he missed the majority of last season due to injury. When he did come back, Tom Brady put him to work immediately, and so I'm not sure right now, again, how that timeshare is going to work out. That's another situation we have to watch for in the preseason. But whichever one of those guys gets a lot of touches, and it could end up being both, they're certainly going to be effective running backs for this New England Patriots offense that certainly is in place to rebound and be amongst one of the league leaders in points scored again. That rounds out our starting quarterbacks for your fantasy football team. When we come back from a quick commercial break, we're going to look at the backup running back / flex options. Once again, it's the Final Wrap Sports Talk Show on DerekShapiroShow.com. Hello everyone and welcome back. I'm your host NFLExporter and you're live on DerekShapiroShow.com listening to the Final Wrap Sports Talk Show. Now we're going to move over into our backup running back / our flex options for fantasy football this year. We're going to start off with Doug Martin of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Now we know that Martin got off to a great start as a rookie, running for over 1,400 yards, but last year was a huge disappointment. He was a top 10 pick in fantasy football. Certainly was a guy who went within the first 2 rounds. Through 6 games, was averaging only 3 yards a carry, scored only 1 touchdown, ended up suffering a shoulder collarbone injury and missed the rest of the season. So that was certainly not what we had in the cards for him. That's why you see him much lower on the list this year. But he's back healthy and certainly looking to rebound. I certainly expect for Doug Martin to give you some excellent play as a possible number 2 / flex option. But I must say, you have to watch to see what happens in the preseason. When he was out last year, second-year player Mike James as well as third-year player Bobby Rainey were very effective. I'm not sure how Tampa Bay is planning on splitting that workload up. But if Doug Martin can get the bulk of the carries, he's certainly still a quality running back out in Tampa Bay. Next in line, you have Darren McFadden of the Oakland Raiders. McFadden, like C.J. Spiller, is another player who's very explosive, but has had a very hard time staying on the football field as he's battled a ton of injuries. If McFadden can stay healthy for an entire season, I will be not surprised at all to see him give you starting running back numbers. The Raiders' offensive line does a great job at run blocking. But again, McFadden is not a player that I would invest a lot of stock in. If you get him on your team, you don't want to depend on him. You're going to be using him for the weeks that he's healthy. And, you have to expect for some type of injury to set in. But I will say, if McFadden can stay healthy, he's certainly a fantasy football player who can be very productive at the running back position. Next in line, I have Lamar Miller of the Miami Dolphins. Now, in limited action last year on only 177 carries, Miller was able to rack up over 700 yards, but his 1 touchdown was completely unacceptable. Now, he was in a timeshare last year with fellow running back Daniel Thomas. This year, Miller faces the same challenge. The Dolphins went out and brought over Noshawn Moreno from the Denver Broncos. And so Lamar Miller is a guy who certainly makes the best of his carries, but does not get the touches to be considered a number 1 or number 2 running back. He's certainly a flex option until further notice, especially being able to score touchdowns. Next in line, you have Trent Richardson of the Indianapolis Colts. Similar to Doug Martin as a rookie, Richardson had over 900 yard rushing and 12 touchdowns. Last year, in only his second year after a couple games, he was traded to Indianapolis. We'll certainly give him the benefit of the doubt. He was not able to learn the playbook and get chemistry with those players, well into the season. But he's worked really hard in the offseason, said he's motivated to show that he still has it. He could be an excellent sleeper pick, but you have to watch in the preseason. The Colts offensive line is still trying to get their act together. They really haven't done a good job opening up holes in the run game or being consistent in pass protection. The other thing you watch out for Richardson, he has veteran Ahmad Bradshaw behind him. We know that Bradshaw is certainly a hard worker and a player who's going to push for playing time behind Richardson out in Indianapolis. Next, we have Pierre Thomas of the New Orleans Saints. Thomas continues to be the starter in that high-scoring offense. Does a good job running the football, but also is very effective catching the ball out of the backfield. And so we know that the Saints, again, their offense scores a lot of points. Pierre Thomas is a very underrated player, and with Darren Sproles now being gone to Philadelphia, that could open up some more touches in production for Pierre Thomas. Next in line, we have Ray Rice of the Baltimore Ravens. Rice inexplicably fell off the map last year. Prior to coming into last season, Rice was a guy who was always averaging somewhere between 16 to 1,800 all-purpose yards with 12 to 13 touchdowns in the season. Last year, and it may have been due to the system that he was in, running the pistol, but last year, completely unacceptable. 660 running yards, 3 yards a carry. I mean, it was just simply disappointing. He was a first-round pick. I actually had him last year, and he just did not get the job done. He also is going to be suspended the first 2 football games of the season as he's going through some off-the-field issues with the domestic incident. And so you wonder where his head at. You've heard rumors coming, not rumors, but you've heard news coming out of Baltimore. The backup running back, Bernard Pierce, is playing a little bit better. The one advantage I will say that Rice has this year, the new offensive coordinator is Gary Kubiak, who's bringing over that zone blocking scheme. That certainly is a system that has been very productive when used in the NFL, and Ray Rice could benefit from that a lot. We certainly at this point have to wait to see. We don't know what to expect from Ray Rice coming into this season. Next in line, you have Rashard Jennings of the New York Giants. Now, this is the situation with Jennings. It's two sides of the coin. Without question, he's going to get a lot of touches running the football. He also is a good receiver out of the backfield. But on the flip side, the Giants' offense is very shaky, and we are not sure what we're going to get. They're more in a West Coast dink and dunk type passing offense. And last year, this offense struggled mightily. Now, when Andre Brown, who's now in Houston, came in the game for the Giants the last couple of games in the season, he was very effective running the football. So it's going to be interesting to see how that situation plays out. Also behind Jennings is rookie running back Andre Williams from Boston College. So I think that Jennings has the job, but it's not 100% secure. He'll certainly have to play well in the preseason to hold on to that spot. But with that being the case, Rashard Jennings, once again, we like that in fantasy football. He's certainly a player who's going to get a lot of touches every game for the New York Giants. Next in line, we have Ben Tate of the Cleveland Browns. Not too high on Tate at all. I think he really benefited from Gary Kubiak's system in Houston, as well as playing behind Arian Foster. I just don't see it in Tate. He doesn't have the speed and the explosion that I would expect from a starting running back in the NFL. But with that being said, he is going to be the starter. I assume he'll be the player who will be getting the goal line touches. And fantasy football, again, it's not about how productive the player is for the team. It's about what his individual statistics are and what he's doing for your football team. Ben Tate could, very surely be a guy to get you, 50 to 60 yards running and a touchdown a week, which will add up to like 12 or 13 points. So I think this is a situation that you want to watch very closely in Cleveland. I'm going to talk about who he's battling in training camp when we move on to our next edition of running backs. But Ben Tate is a guy I certainly wouldn't trust to start on my team or be a flex play coming into the NFL season. Last, you have, second to last, we have Sean Green of the Tennessee Titans. Green is another guy who has a very, very, very good offensive line in front of him. Probably one of the best offensive lines in the NFL out in Tennessee. But like Ben Tate, and he's slower than Tate, just not starting running back, in my opinion, in the NFL. Really doesn't have the speed. He's more of a power back. Certainly effective around the goal line. But he had a couple 1,000-yard seasons out in New York for the Jets, and they didn't resign him. So I think that kind of tells you that the ceiling is not too high for this guy. Sean Green is certainly not a player that I would include on my fantasy football roster. And then last, you have Toby Gerhart of the Jacksonville Jaguars. Gerhart has been a backup for a few years now out in Minnesota behind Adrian Peterson. This Jaguars team is amongst the worst in the NFL, and I really don't expect much for Gerhart. Again, he's a guy who's going to get a lot of touches, so you have to like that. He'll certainly be their goal line running back. You have to like that, but I'm just not sure how productive Toby Gerhart's going to be. We certainly have to see how he does in the preseason in a couple games before we can even think about touching him. Now, these last running backs I'm going to mention are running backs who are either good flex plays, or you want to grab these guys in case the starting running back on that respective football team gets hurt. Darren Sproles for the Philadelphia Eagles. He's certainly going to be a major part of Chip Kelly's offense. I think he's an excellent flex play. Joyke Bell from the Detroit Lions. He gets a lot of playing time. You got to like what he brings to the table. With him, he usually always gets you 60 to 70 all-purpose yards. It's really about if he can get in the end zone to make or break his numbers, to make him worth being in your lineup on a weekly basis. Mark Ingram is a guy you want to watch out for New Orleans. He looks really good through 2 preseason games. You certainly want to watch for him pushing for playing time. He could get the goal line carries for New Orleans. I think Mark Ingram is certainly a player that you want to keep your eyes on. LeGarrette Blount, we mentioned him. We know the Pittsburgh Steelers are going to run the football a ton this year. He is going to be behind Le'Veon Bell, but there's certainly more than enough opportunity there for Blount to make the use of his carries. Also maybe a guy used in goal line situations. Fred Jackson for the Buffalo Bills has been one of the more steady performers throughout the years. He'll continue to get his touches. If something happens to C.J. Spiller, he'll be next in line to be productive in which he certainly did last year in the games that Spiller did not play in. You have Knowshon Moreno of the Miami Dolphins. Hey, last year Moreno had over 1,500 all-purpose yards, over 10 TDs, was a top 10 fantasy football running back. He's battling an injury in preseason. He'll certainly be ready when the season starts. It's also in the competition battle against Lamar Miller, so we'll see how that works out. But I know Knowshon Moreno is certainly a running back when healthy, has shown to be productive in the NFL. Next in line, I have Bernard Pierce of the Baltimore Ravens. Pierce is actually going to start the first 2 games of the season while Ray Rice is serving a suspension. Pierce is another guy who I mentioned in training camp is really pushing for playing time. Obviously, we'll be able to see the first 2 games of the season if Rice was to miss any more time, what Bernard Pierce brings to the table. Next in line, you have Maurice Jones-Drew of the Oakland Raiders. Right now, he's certainly battling Darren McFadden for that starting spot. So he may find himself in the lineup. You certainly replace him where we have McFadden ranked on our list. But I still think that he's going to get some playing time this year, and certainly could be a guy who's effective around the goal line area. Next in line, you have Danny Woodhead of the San Diego Chargers. Woodhead gets used a lot by Phillip Rivers in the passing game, running screens, getting matched up against linebackers. Also does well running the football out of the shotgun. And so Danny Woodhead is certainly a good flex option for your football team. Not every week, but in some matchups, you certainly have to look his way. Next in line, you have Ronnie Hillman of the Denver Broncos. Right now, Monty Ball is out battling an injury, and so Ronnie Hillman is in there getting the reps in. If Ball is ineffective or if Ball does get injured, Ronnie Hillman is a guy who can step in and obviously take advantage of the situations in Denver where they'll be scoring the football a lot. Next in line, we have BenJarvus Green-Ellis of the Cincinnati Bengals. The veteran is still very effective. As we mentioned, Hugh Jackson, their new offensive coordinator, is going to be running the football a lot this year. And so BenJarvus Green-Ellis will certainly get his touches. How many? We have to see how that goes. But he's another guy who can certainly get in there and get some touchdowns around that goal line area. Next in line, you have James Starks of the Green Bay Packers. Starks will be behind Eddie Lacy. Again, Green Bay's another explosive offense. If Lacy were to miss any times, Starks will step in and be able to take advantage of that production. Next, we have Ahmad Bradshaw of the Indianapolis Colts. He's behind Trent Richardson. Like I said, it's really Richardson's job to earn. You better believe Ahmad Bradshaw is pushing for playing time. No, he will get his opportunities. Ahmad Bradshaw may be a decent flex play for you in some weeks if you can catch him in the right matchup. And then you also have Roy Halou for the Washington Redskins, another guy that if something happens to Alfred Morris, he can certainly step in and put in some numbers for you. And then Jonathan Stewart out in Carolina, they're going to be looking to run that football a lot with the inexperience that they have at wide receiver. He's just a guy who cannot stay healthy and on the football field, and so you certainly have to err caution there. If you can catch him in the right week, though, Jonathan Stewart should be the goal line running back for this Carolina Panthers football team. Now, some handcuffs I'm going to mention, and these are players that, again, kind of similar to what we've been discussing before. You know, those last guys I just discussed, Darren Sproles, Mark Ingram, those guys, they're going to definitely get playing time. We have to wait to see a couple weeks into the regular season exactly how much, but those are certainly guys you want to factor in. Certainly some of those guys could potentially be a weekly flex play. Can certainly put up some big stats for you if their starting running back for that team goes down. These guys we're about to talk about now, these running backs, we call them handcuffs. They are strictly for the purposes if their starting running back on that team gets hurt. They'll be the next guy stepping in, and at that point get the full workload. You have Bilal Powell and Chris Ivory out for the New York Jets. You have Dre Archer for the Pittsburgh Steelers. Christian Michael and Ronnie Turbin for the Seattle Seahawks. You have Trey Mason out in St. Louis. Now Davis out in Kansas City. That kid definitely has a lot of hop in his step. Terrence West, I mentioned him out in Cleveland. He's actually battling Ben Tate for that starting spot. And in my opinion, he looks a lot better than Ben Tate. Wouldn't be surprised at all to see him starting. You have Carlos Hyde out in San Francisco. You know that the 49ers have one of the top rushing attacks year in and year out in the NFL. You have Mike James and Bobby Rainey. I mentioned them a little bit earlier behind Doug Martin out in Tampa Bay. You have Bishop Sankey. Now that's a player you certainly want to look out for. Sankey is a rookie out of Washington. He's behind Sean Green. As I mentioned, the Titans have one of the best offensive lines in the NFL. Don't be surprised to see him in the starting lineup at some point in time this season. I don't expect the Titans to win a lot of games, and I think that Sankey is just a better fit, bringing more explosion and speed on the field behind Sean Green at this current point in time. Lance Dunbar is out in Dallas. We know their offense puts up a lot of points. You have Safarian Taylor. He's another guy that you want to keep an eye out for. And then Jeremy Hill. He's out in Cincinnati. Now, he's third on the depth chart behind Benjarvis Green-Ellis, but he's a player who's working very hard in camp. We'll see how that works out. James White out in New England. We're hearing a lot of good things coming out about him in training camp. He's certainly worth keeping an eye on. You know, if you're with the New England Patriots offense and you're doing well, you get on the football field, you're going to have an opportunity to score the football. And then Devonta Freeman and Jacquez Rodgers are two running backs out in Atlanta. Steven Jackson has not been able to stay healthy the last couple of years, so there's a possibility that they can get in the game and do some good things for you. And then another guy that I really like who's underrated is Kadeem Carey. He's a rookie out of Arizona, had a very good college career. If anything were to happen to Matt Forte, he can certainly step in line and be productive with that prolific Bears scoring attack. That ends our rankings for our running backs. After the commercial break, we're going to go ahead and look at our wide receivers. Once again, it's the NFL Exporter on DerekShapiroShow.com. You're now tuned in to the final wrap. Stay tuned. Welcome back, everyone. Once again, it's the NFL Exporter on DerekShapiroShow.com. You're now listening to the Final Wrap Sports Talk Show. Once again, the show comes on each and every Tuesday at 7 p.m. If you missed the live broadcast, the show re-airs every Saturday at 2 p.m. If you're unable to catch either one of those shows, you simply go to the archive section here on the website, look under NFL Exporter, and we're currently in the month of August. You can catch any shows that you missed up to this point. Now we're moving over to our wide receiver rankings for fantasy football. Starting off the list without question is Calvin Johnson of the Detroit Lions. Megatron continues to impress, has every single attribute, including the intangibles that you want out of your star player. Without question, Calvin Johnson is the top wide receiver who will be coming off the draft board this year in drafts. Next in line, I have Demaryius Thomas of the Denver Broncos. Thomas has put up back-to-back 1,000-yard seasons with Peyton Manning at the helm. He certainly is Peyton Manning's #1 target, and when that's the case, you're in position to succeed. I expect another monster year from Demaryius Thomas. Next in line, I have Dez Bryant of the Dallas Cowboys. Bryant is in an offense that throws the ball an awful lot. He continues to improve his play every year. Last year, over 1,200 yards and 13 TD catches. I certainly think he can duplicate or exceed those numbers again this year. You certainly want Dez Bryant on your fantasy football team. Next in line, A.J. Green, Cincinnati Bengals. Now look, the Bengals are looking to run the football a little bit more this year. I will probably have Green bumped up to number 2 or 3 on the list. But with that being said, he still is the top target out in Cincinnati. Andy Dalton will continue to look for him early and often. Green put up 7 straight 100-yard games last year, just continues to excel. A.J. Green will certainly have another big year. You definitely want A.J. Green at wide receiver on your fantasy football team. Next in line, Julio Jones of the Atlanta Falcons. Prior to being hurt last year, Jones was on pace for a career year. This year he's back healthy. You know that he has Roddy White on the other side. Quarterback Matty Ice looks for him a lot. Jones, one of the most explosive playmakers in the NFL, has great leaping ability, has excellent speed, and he's a big-time playmaker. It's certainly good to see Julio Jones back. If he can stay healthy, Julio Jones will definitely put up the big numbers for you, and you want him on your fantasy football team. Next, I have Brandon Marshall for the Chicago Bears. He's Jay Cutler's favorite target. Is fresh off another 1,000-yard season. Is a big-time threat in the red zone. Without question, Brandon Marshall is one of the most consistent wide receivers in the NFL, and I certainly expect for him to have another banner year. Brandon Marshall is definitely a guy I would want on my fantasy football team. Next in line, you have Andre Johnson of the Houston Texans. Johnson put up over 1,400 yards last year. We certainly are hoping he can improve on his 5 touchdowns. Kind of held him back a little bit, but he'll certainly be the main target for new starting cornerback Ryan Fitzpatrick. Andre Johnson has proven he can put up the numbers in fantasy football. Definitely a guy you want on your football team. Next in line, I have Vincent Jackson of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Jackson continues to impress year in and year out, putting up over 1,000 yards and up towards 10 TDs. He has a new quarterback in Josh McCown. He'll certainly be the main target for him. Vincent Jackson, underrated player, but very solid in fantasy football. Next, Keenan Allen, second-year player for the San Diego Chargers, was the only rookie wide receiver last year to have over 1,000 yards. This guy knows how to get the job done. He's Phillip Rivers' favorite target in the passing game on the outside. Keenan Allen will be an excellent value pickup. Should be able to pick him up in the latter rounds and get big-time production from him. Next, you have Alshon Jeffrey of the Chicago Bears. Again, the Bears have one of the best offenses in the NFL. At 6'5", Jeffrey is a huge threat in the red zone. Is really turning into a complete wide receiver, working alongside Brandon Marshall there. Alshon Jeffrey had over 1,400 yards receiving last year. He certainly is a big-time player and a guy that you want on your fantasy football team. Next in line, Jordy Nelson, Green Bay Packers, just got a new contract this year. Aaron Rodgers is his quarterback. He'll certainly get a ton of targets. Him and Rodgers have excellent chemistry, especially on that fade back shoulder pass. Jordy Nelson, another late round value pickup. Definitely a guy you want on your football team. Next in line, I have Wes Welker, Denver Broncos, continues to be the best slot receiver in the NFL. Playing with Peyton Manning, you know this guy is going to succeed. Wes Welker, another guy you can catch in latter rounds and really get kind of #1 production at the wide receiver position out of. Next in line, Roddy White of the Atlanta Falcons. White was not healthy until the latter part of last season, but when he was healthy, him and Matt Ryan hooked up quite a bit. He's still, even though Julio Jones is there, White is still the one who's been with Matty Ryan the most, and he'll certainly continue to get a heavy dose of targets, especially now that Tony Gonzalez is gone. I expect for Roddy White to be back on track and amongst one of the best wide receivers in fantasy football this year. Next, you have Randall Cobb, the other wide receiver for the Green Bay Packers. Speedy guy. He'll continue to excel in the slot. Missed a lot of time last year due to injury, but when he returned, was certainly one of Rodgers' favorite targets. Ended up catching a game-winning touchdown that sent the Packers to the playoffs last year. Randall Cobb is an excellent pickup for your fantasy football team. Next, Pierre Garçon of the Washington Redskins had over 100 catches for over 1,300 yards last year. Now that Deshaun Jackson is there, you can't double both of these guys. Should certainly open up things in the passing games. Pierre Garçon, underrated, but a very talented player and a guy you certainly want in your fantasy football team at the wide receiver position. Next in line, Larry Fitzgerald of the Arizona Cardinals. Fitzgerald, speed was never his calling card, so you can't say that he lost a step. Has every other attribute in the repertoire. Him and Carson Palmer are both veterans. Now, last year was the first year in a long time that Fitzgerald didn't lead the team in receiving yards, but he's certainly still a touchdown hog, and I expect him to get back on track. He's a pride guy. You're not going to hear him say a lot about it, but best believe he took note that he did not eclipse 1,000 yards last year. I know Fitzgerald put in the work. He's going to be a very good wide receiver in fantasy football this year. Next, Michael Crabtree of the San Francisco 49ers. This is Colin Kaepernick's favorite target. When he's been healthy, Michael Crabtree gets a ton of targets, has nice ability to run after the catch, and with all the weapons the 49ers have in place, I certainly think Michael Crabtree's in line to have a big year. He's a guy I would want on my fantasy football team. Next, Antonio Brown of the Pittsburgh Steelers. let's be honest, I don't expect for Brown to have 110 catches for 1,499 yards like he did last year, but I certainly think being the number one target for Big Ben now, especially that Emmanuel Sanders is gone, he certainly can improve on those 8 touchdown receptions, and I certainly expect him to still gain over 1,000 yards. Antonio Brown has proven to be a very effective wide receiver in fantasy football, another guy you should be able to pick up with great value. Next, Deshaun Jackson. He's the other wide receiver out in Washington. As I mentioned, when you have Pierre Garçon on the other side, defenses can't double both of these guys. Jackson's still one of the fastest players in the NFL. RG3 should continue to put the ball on him. Jackson had over 1,300 yards last year in Philadelphia. He'll have an opportunity to do the same thing. Deshaun Jackson is definitely a playmaker you want on your fantasy football team. Next, I have Cordell Patterson out of the Minnesota Vikings. Patterson was one of the most productive fantasy football wide receivers the last 4 games of last season. The quarterback situation has not been solidified there, so it may take a little bit of time for chemistry to set in. But Cordell Patterson is a big-time talent. I'm hearing great things coming out of Minnesota training camp. Cordell Patterson is certainly a player you want to look out for, maybe draft a little bit later in case he does blossom into what we think he can do, so that way you don't end up missing out on him by another owner picking him up on a free agent wire. Next in line, you have T.Y. Hilton of the Indianapolis Colts. Him and Andrew Luck are entering their 3rd year together. Their chemistry continues to evolve each and every year. And with veteran Reggie Wayne out last year, Hilton really became Luck's main target. Now, they did bring over Hakeem Nicks, and Wayne is back. So, this could be a situation where week to week you could see the top receiver change. But Hilton is the most explosive. Him and Andrew Luck hook up for a lot of big plays on deep balls. T.Y. Hilton, I'm giving the benefit of the doubt and ranking as the top Colts wide receiver coming into this season. Next in line, I have Marcus Colston of the New Orleans Saints. Now look, Darren Sproles is no longer there. He's been averaging 77 catches the last couple years. You also have Lance Moore has left to Pittsburgh, and Devery Henderson is gone. So outside of Jimmy Graham, Marcus Colston has been with quarterback Drew Brees the longest. I don't see any reason why, if healthy, Marcus Colston can't give you some good production as a possible number 2 wide receiver in fantasy football this year. Next in line, I have Percy Harvin of the Seattle Seahawks. Now, injury concerns are the only thing that are holding Harvin's rankings back. He's been a guy who's just been able to make it through a full 16 games. But we know very well that if while he is healthy, the Seattle Seahawks are going to look to get his hands on the football a lot. And Harvin is one of the most dynamic playmakers in the NFL. Percy Harvin is certainly a guy that you want on your roster. Next in line, I have Victor Cruz of the New York Giants. Now, the Giants offense right now is still building chemistry and getting it together. But with that being said, Cruz without question is going to be Eli Manning's main target. And if those two guys can get on the same page and hook up, Cruz will certainly be a viable number 2 / number 3 wide receiver for your football team. Cruz is still an elite talent. He's still not recovering, but still getting fully back from a slight MCL injury at the end of last year. And again, his production is really glued to how well that offense for the Giants can do. Next in line, you have Torrey Smith of the Baltimore Ravens. He continues to be Joe Flacco's number 1 target. Certainly a guy with Dennis Pitta and Steve Smith now in the equation should have a little bit of pressure taken off of him as far as defenses, adding double coverage on him. He's very fast, can hit you off before you know it, catching deep passes. Torrey Smith is certainly proven to be a good wide receiver in fantasy football the last couple of years. Next in line, you have Mike Wallace of the Miami Dolphins. I think his numbers would have been much improved last year if quarterback Ryan Tannehill would have been able to connect with him on some deep balls. They missed a lot last year. Wallace certainly has to do a better job catching the football. Has been labeled a one-trick pony as far as running deep routes. I think he's trying to work on running some other routes as well, but he'll be the main target in Miami. Mike Wallace is certainly a number 2 / number 3 wide receiver in fantasy football. Next in line, we have Jeremy Maclin of the Philadelphia Eagles. Now look, Macklin's coming in expecting to fill the shoes of Deshaun Jackson, who left to Washington. As I mentioned a little bit earlier, Jackson had over 1,300 yards in this offense last year. Now, Maclin certainly has top-end speed. He's a playmaking. We've seen that in past years. Just has not been able to stay on the football field. like Percy Harvin, a big-time injury concern. He's a guy I would want on my roster, but you don't want to depend on this guy. You certainly want to make sure you have a steady player to back him up in case he ends up on the injury report like we've seen in so many seasons. And then you also have Danny Amendola. Amendola, like Harvin, like Jeremy Maclin, is a guy who struggled with injuries. He has to stay on the football field. If he can do that, he'll be used heavily by Tom Brady. He was brought in from St. Louis to replace Wes Welker. We know how much damage Wes Welker did when he was playing a slot for New England. So Danny Amendola, another underrated player, if he can stay healthy, he should certainly excel playing in that slot position under Tom Brady. That is going to round out our top tier wide receivers, guys that will either be a starter or number 2/number 3. When we return from a commercial break, we're going to round out our fantasy rankings at wide receivers. These wide receivers very well could be number 2, but I think a number 3 or more of a flex play due to the team they're on will be the position that we'll rank them in. NFL Exporter live on DerekShapiroShow.com. The final wrap will be back in one moment. Welcome back to the final wrap. I'm your host, NFL Exporter. Now let's get into our low end number 2, really number 3 kind of flex play, more matchup wide receivers. A lot of these wide receivers are really talented. The issue is we just don't know on what week they're going to perform. Our receivers that we went over the first tier, kind of those starters, your number 1. Solid number 2 receivers. Those are guys who you're certainly expecting production from on a week in and week out basis. These guys here, I would say, hey, maybe 7 or 8 games you can get that elite production. It's just going to be hard to know when. Like our running backs, though, if some of the starters get hurt that we mentioned on some of these teams, these guys will be next in line to receive the bulk of the production, and that certainly will allow them to put up some big numbers. We're going to start off with Reggie Wayne. Out in Indianapolis, prior to his injury last year, he was Andrew Luck's main target. We certainly hope that Wayne has recovered 100%. If he's back in the lineup, without question, Reggie Wayne is going to give you production in some weeks. Next, we have Emmanuel Sanders. Eric Decker caught 12 touchdown passes, had over 1,100 receiving yards last year out in Denver. Obviously, with Peyton Manning at quarterback, you're in a situation to succeed. Without question, Emmanuel Sanders is going to be an effective fantasy player some weeks. You just have to catch what game. That's what makes it a little bit tough. Next in line, Malcolm Floyd of the San Diego Chargers. Floyd is another guy who really was Phillip Rivers' favorite target last year until he got hurt. Rivers and him have a long-lasting relationship in San Diego. Without question, Malcolm Floyd will be able to give you some production some weeks. Next, we have Michael Floyd. For the Arizona Cardinals. He's playing opposite Larry Fitzgerald. Led the team in receiving yards last year. He's in his 3rd year. Has really been working hard. He works with Fitzgerald in the offseason. This guy is certainly going to be fantasy football relevant with some games over 100 yards and a touchdown. We got to watch out for Michael Floyd. Next in line, Marvin Jones of the Cincinnati Bengals. Now, we got to put an asterisk by Jones. He suffered a serious foot injury in preseason, which is going to have him coming back around week 4 or 5. It's a foot. He's got to run on it. And so if he can get back fully healthy when he returns, I certainly think there'll be some games this year that he can do well. But I hate to see this injury because this guy was a solid number 2 wide receiver. Had over 700 yards with 10 touchdown catches last year out in Cincinnati. So he's a guy, as long as he can get back to 100% health, he'll certainly be able to give you some production in some games for Cincinnati this year. Another guy, Riley Cooper, out in Philadelphia. Is not the fastest of receivers, but runs excellent routes, has good hands, and at 6'4", he's just a big target for Nick Foles. Him and Foles have good chemistry. Riley Cooper is certainly a wide receiver who will come through for you in some fantasy football games. Next, you have Anquan Bolden of the San Francisco 49ers. A lot of weapons out in San Francisco. There's certainly going to be weeks where the defense is going to be focusing on Crabtree and Vernon Davis, and Anquan Bolden is still a guy who can win in one-on-one battles. Anquan Bolden will certainly give you some production in fantasy football. Next, we have Julian Edelman, another weapon for Tom Brady in the passing game. Last year had over 100 catches. I'm certain he'll be able to have some good fantasy football games this year. Next, you have Sammy Watkins, the rookie wide receiver in Buffalo. Look, E.J. Manuel has his work cut out for him, learning how to be a good quarterback, a consistent quarterback in the NFL. But there will certainly be weeks where Sammy Watkins will put up some good fantasy football numbers for your football team. Next in line, we have Tavon Austin of the St. Louis Rams. Look, Danny Amendola was a big-time producer playing that slot position for Sam Bradford. That's where Austin will be playing. I believe if Bradford can stay healthy before the end of the year is over, Tavon Austin, and he's a hybrid player. He's a guy that they just look to get the ball in his hands in space. He's one of the fastest players I've seen in the NFL in a long time. Tavon Austin is certainly a guy, if you can catch him on the right week, will put up some big numbers for your fantasy football team. DeAndre Hopkins plays opposite of Andre Johnson out in Houston. He'll certainly have his fair share of good games this year. Mike Evans, the rookie wide receiver for Tampa Bay, plays opposite Vincent Jackson. Without question, there'll be some games this year. He'll be highly productive. Terrence Williams of the Dallas Cowboys, I really like his upside. Had over 700 yards and 5 touchdowns as a backup last year in Dallas. He'll be starting this year opposite Dez Bryant. You know, Bryant's going to get a lot of attention. Without question, Terrence Williams is going to be a solid play for you on your fantasy football team. Jared Boykin for the Green Bay Packers. He'll be in the equation. We know the Packers like to run a lot of 3 receiver sets. You have Jordy Nelson and Randall Cobb being the top options there. But I think that Jared Boykin showed last year he can be effective, and he should be improved. I really like Jared Boykin. Should have some pretty good games this season in fantasy football. Kelvin Benjamin, rookie wide receiver out in Carolina. He'll be Cam Newton's top target this year. At 6'5", 240 pounds, obviously a big-time threat in the red zone. Be real interesting to see how that situation plays out, but I certainly expect Kelvin Benjamin to be able to be effective in some games this year in fantasy football. Next in line, Eric Decker for the New York Jets. He certainly won't have 12 TD catches and over 1,100 yards like he did last year in Denver, but he's going to be the top target for Geno Smith. We like wide receivers who get a lot of targets. I certainly expect for Eric Decker to have some games this year where he'll get 80 to 100 yards and a touchdown, which are certainly numbers that we approve of in fantasy football. Next in line, Golden Tate out in Detroit. Him and Matt Stafford are establishing some good rapport already in the preseason, and obviously teams are going to be focused on Calvin Johnson. Golden Tate is a solid pickup for your fantasy football team. Kenny Stills out in New Orleans. He'll be starting opposite Marcus Colston. We know Jimmy Graham gets a ton of attention there. Last year, Stills had a nice rookie year with over 600 yards and 5 TDs. Him and Breeze hooked up on a lot of deep balls. Kenny Stills is definitely a guy you want on your fantasy football team. Couple wide receivers in their second year out in New England, Aaron Dobson and Kimbrell Tompkins. Both of those guys certainly are another year into the system. Even though they were limited due to injuries and learning the system last year, Dobson had 6 TD catches. Tompkins had 8. Tompkins caught a touchdown in the game last night, New England versus Philadelphia. So both of those players are certainly worth consideration. They're going to be getting a lot of production in New England this year. Brandon Cooks, the rookie from Oregon State, has looked excellent. He'll be used basically to replace Darren Sproles. The production, Sproles was a guy who caught 77 balls a year over the past 3 seasons out in New Orleans. You want to watch this youngster. Had a dazzling first week in preseason. He's very fast, and Drew Brees is one of the most accurate passers in the NFL. Brandon Cooks is worth a strong look to be on your fantasy football team. Ruben Randall, he's the starting number 2 wide receiver for the New York Giants. Brian Hartline is a solid play. He actually led the Dolphins in receiving yards last year, so you want to watch out for him. And then some other names we're going to throw at you. Doug Baldwin, he's a starting wide receiver this year in Seattle. We know that Russell Wilson is certainly a big-time playmaker. You got Mike Williams. He'll be starting opposite Sammy Watkins out in Buffalo. Greg Jennings led the team in receiving last year for Minnesota. Dwayne Bowe, we don't know what to expect from him, but if he can get back to Pro Bowl form, he's the number 1 target out in Kansas City. Rod Streeter, Denarius Moore, James Jones, one of those players should emerge and be the top receiver for the Raiders. And then you have Harry Douglas, should have a couple good games out in Atlanta. Steve Smith should still be able to win some one-on-one matchups out in Baltimore. You have Miles Austin, especially if Josh Gordon is not on the football field. Either him or Nate Burleson are going to be asked to step in and give you the production for the Cleveland Browns. Jermaine Kearse is a very nice young player. He's with the Seattle Seahawks as well. Hakeem Nicks may give you some production some weeks out in Indianapolis. Nate Washington always finds a couple good fantasy football games. And Justin Hunter, their second-year player, has certainly gotten a lot of praise early on in the season in fantasy football, along with Kendall Wright, who's a guy who caught over 100 passes last year out in Tennessee. Marquise Lee is certainly worth noting. He's a rookie wide receiver. He'll have more than enough opportunities out in Jacksonville. And then Vincent Brown for the San Diego Chargers, and Chris Givens for the St. Louis Rams. All right, that wraps up another great edition of the Final Wrap Sports Talk Show. I'm your host, NFL Exporter. Don't forget to tune in next Tuesday at 7 p.m. as we'll be rounding out our fantasy rankings with our tight ends, our defense, special teams, and kickers. It's the Final Wrap Sports Show on DerekShapiroShow.com. 1100.